Alrighty guys, today we're going to work on saving data to files and loading data from files. So I went and hit the How to Think Like a Computer Scientist. Here's their comment. While a program is running, its data is stored in random access memory, RAM. RAM is fast and inexpensive, but it is volatile, which means that when the program ends or when the computer shuts down, the data in the RAM disappears. So to make the data available, the next time the computer is turned on and the program is started, it has to be written to a non-volatile storage medium, such as a hard drive, a USB drive, or CD read-write. Data on non-volatile storage media is stored in named locations called files. So just like a variable is a named location in memory, a file is a named location on the disk. By reading and writing programs can save information between program runs. It'd be really annoying if you were doing something for the census and you had 8 million Oklahoma records to process and you had typed them all in, but you didn't have a way to save the file. So the next time you wanted to run another analysis on it, you had to type in 8 million pieces of data again. That's a silly example, but writing your thesis paper, your research paper, if you could only type it in and then print it out and you didn't have a way to save it and load it for later, that would also be really annoying. So working with files is a lot like working with a notebook. To use the notebook, it has to be opened. When you're done with it, it has to be closed. We're going to use some of these words, open and close. While the notebook is open, it can either be read to or read from or written to. In either case, the notebook holder knows where they are. They can read the whole notebook in its natural order, or they can skip around. Now, we're not going to work with skipping around in a file, but we're going to work from opening it and writing to it, or opening it and reading from the beginning to end. So here's how you open a file. You use the open keyword, the open function. Let's type a little of this in. So notice the syntax here. It says open, and then the first argument inside the parentheses is a file name, and the next one is a letter in quotes. W stands for write. If you were going to read it, you would put an R there instead. I'm not feeling terribly clever yet, so I'm just going to call this July 24. Name, date, write to a file. That's what this program's going to do. File is equal to open, and let's just give it a file name. T.txt, how's that for a clever file name? .txt will tell the operating system that if the file is double-clicked, it should bring it up in Notepad or your favorite text editor. So that's why I chose txt rather than something else. Alright, now we're going to actually write some stuff to it. Now we don't use print statements in this language to write to a file. So file.write, this is my first file. File.write, this is incredible. Alright, we're overselling it a little bit, but we'll go with that. When you're done with the file, you want to close it. And you want to close it as soon as possible. You don't want your program sitting there with an open file unless you have a good need to otherwise. Because when that file is open, it's locked to the operating system, especially if it's open for writing. So you can't go and make a backup copy of the file. You can't just select all the files in a directory and copy them somewhere else. If something else needs to access that file, you'll get that file is in use error that you may have seen. So in general, you want to write to the file and then you want to close it. Closing it lets the operating system flush all the bytes to it, securely update all of its pointers or whatever so that it'll be all nice and tidy and safe on the operating system, on the hard drive. Let's run it. Open t.text. Now I made a mistake. I forgot to specify whether I wanted it to be open for reading or writing, so it tried to open it for reading. We don't have that file. So I need to add up to my open command a W as a second parameter, quote W quote, second argument to the open function. Alright, now I don't see anything on screen, but that's because all it's doing is sending two things to disk. Saving two things to the t.txt file. I'm going to go up here and just, let's see, just do a search for t.txt, see if it finds it real quickly. Well, I have more than one. If I go into the same directory where I saved this program, I'll see the file. So if I open Finder or Explorer, go to my directory, sort it by date, there's t.txt right there. And I load it up, and what looks kind of weird about this file? Maybe not what we expected. If we had printed these things to the screen, what would be different about the way we are seeing it in the file? Yeah, there's no line endings. It's all in one file, all in one line. So we want to add some /ns to it. \n, like that. Now I'm going to go back to that file, open it up, double click on it, and that looks a little bit better. Bless you. Alright, now we're going to open the file again for reading. So opening a file creates what we call a file handle. In this example, file refers to the new handle object. Our program calls methods on the handle, and this makes changes to the actual file. On line 1, the open function takes two arguments, a file name and then the W, which means that the mode we're in is to open the file for writing. If you open it for writing, if the file doesn't exist, it's created. If the file does exist, it's erased, it's overwritten. So you have to kind of be careful about that. So reading a file, a line at a time. Here what we're going to do is we're going to reopen the file, except we're going to open it for reading, just like that, with an R. And then we're going to go into a loop. And the loop is going to call readLine. ReadLine pulls data from the file a line at a time. But if the length of what we just read is equal to 0, then we break. Otherwise, we're going to print it. So, let's reopen that file. File is equal to open t.txt, comma, open it for reading. Now we're just going to use while true because we want it just to loop over and over and over until we're done and we hit the break statement. So I need to store the data that I'm going to read into a variable. I'm just going to use S for string. If the length of that string is equal to 0, len parentheses s is equal to 0, that means that it's at the end of the file and there's no more data to read. So we want to break. Otherwise, it's printed out. Print what we just read. Now we need to close the file. File.close. And then maybe print a done message. Let's change our program description up here. Write to and read from a file. Alright, if you got it typed in and run, or if you got it typed in and saved, go ahead and run it. Make sure you don't get any syntax errors. And you'll probably notice something odd about the way it looks on the screen. Slightly different than what we might hope for. Which is, it's got these extra character turns in it. So when we saved it to file, we had to add the /n's. But now that we've got it saved to file, those /n's are annoying because they print out as blank lines. So we're going to come here, and before we print it out, we're going to strip the stuff off at the end. Let's see, that's my right hand side, so I'm going to do an R strip. s.rstrip. Let's see if that does it. Nope. S is equal to s.rstrip. Yep, that did it. That looks a lot better. So if you recall, what rstrip does is it removes a white space, including tabs and extra spaces and line feeds at the end of a string. Lstrip would do the same for the beginning of the file. Excuse me, beginning of the line. And if you call strip without either the R or the L, it does it from both sides. Alright, anybody need typo correction? All good? Alrighty. Alright, so their note here is that this is a very handy pattern to add to our toolbox. You open the file, you enter a while loop, you read from the file, you do something with it. Whether the something is just to print it or to do something more complex. Like you could add the data to a list if you were going to be adding up some numbers or whatever. Turning the file into a list of lines. Here they open a file called friends.txt. Instead of using read line, which reads a single line in, they call read lines, which reads in the entire file at one time, into a list. And then they call sort. I don't think we used sort yet. We could. Let's play with sort. Just go back to your shell, Python shell. Let's create a new list. List is equal to 8675. And now let's sort it. L.sort. And then print it back out. Just hit L, enter it as 5678. Okay, so we're going to write a program now that will let the user enter numbers. We will save all of those numbers to a file. And then we're going to close the file, and then we're going to open it back up, and we're going to read it all back in. So we're going to need a while loop that lets them enter data until they are tired of entering data. We'll call it a test scores program. So print test scores program. We need to open our file. File is equal to open, and we're opening it for writing. I'm going to call it scores.txt. Again, I'm using txt just so that I can double click it. You can make that extension anything you want, but like if you name it .xls, then Excel's going to think that it's going to open it. If you name it .doc, then Word's going to try to open it. If you name it .exe, the operating system's going to think that you can run the program, and you can't. So, you know, txt is a nice extension for this kind of thing because these are text files. Alrighty, and I want to open it for writing. Alright, so we're going to use another while true loop. While true meaning just go into an infinite loop until you hit a break statement. So let's get some data. Score equals input, enter a score, or -1 to break. User doesn't know what break means. Stop. Yes, sir.
Is there a reason you put the true in parentheses earlier?
No. That's a habit because other languages like C++ and Java do require the parentheses. So, yeah. Why did I do that there and not here? The parentheses don't hurt it, but in this language they don't particularly help it. Just like if statements. By mistake, I could have written an if statement. Don't write this. An if statement could have looked like this. If A is equal to 100, I would need two equal signs, as always, but the parentheses are optional. Very good question. Okay, so we've got the score. We're going to turn it into a number as usual. Score is equal to float score. But now we need to see if they typed in a -1. If, there we go. If score is equal to -1, then we want to break. Otherwise, we want to write it to the disk. So, file.write the score followed by a character turn so that each score is on its own line. I don't think that's going to work. I don't think write allows me to have two parameters. Just a second. Yeah, I didn't think so. Is there a write line? Okay, go back.
Did you just use 2 lines since it ends at the end anyways?
Yeah, I could just call write two times in a row. Alright, that's what I'll do. Alright, we're going to write the score out. Going to write out a \n. Once we're done with it, we're going to close the file. Argument must be a string, not a float. Well, here I converted it into a float, and I didn't need to. Okay, we got a couple of changes to make. comment that line out because we don't need it to be a number. And if it's a string, we have to put in quotes around that -1. So I just changed this line to add the quotes around -1. Those are the two lines that I've just changed. And that being the case, I could have added on the plus sign and then the /n. I could have concatenated /n so that we were doing the right in a single. Make sure it works. Alright, now if I go out to my operating system and I look for scores.txt, it ought to be there. So I'm going to go into my CIT1113 directory. There's scores.txt. I'm going to open it up. And there they are. I could change them if I wanted to. Alright, one problem with this program is that every time we run it, it overwrites the file. It'd be like every time you launched Word, it went and erased the file that you were working on. That's not too cool. We ought to make this a menu-based program where it says, 1, create file, 2, read from file. We may do that next. We've got the file closed. Let's open it back up, and we're going to read from it with code that's very similar to this. And what we're going to do is we're just going to store each number into a list. So we have to open it for reading. File is equal to open. I'm going to use the same file name, scores.txt. And instead of W, what do I put here since we're reading it? Yep. While true, score is equal to file.readline. But now we want to take the extra spaces and carriage returns off of it, so I'm going to just do score is equal to score.strip. In this case, I don't care about which side I'm taking the spaces off. I'm getting it off both of them. And then lastly, we want to convert that to a number now. So score is equal to float.score. And let's add it onto a list. I can't add it onto the list unless I have a list to begin with, so I'm going to have to create an empty list. So, up above here, up above my while loop, I need to make an empty list. I think I'll just call it capital L. How do I define an empty list that I can then start appending onto? Yep, square braces, empty brackets. Now I can append that score, now that we've read it, stripped it, and converted it into a float, to our list. Oops, L.append. Now I've made a mistake here. I forgot to check to see if the length of the line was 0, so that I could break out of it. I need to do that before I start stripping it and stuff like that. The reason for that is if you strip a blank line, then its length will be 0, and that would mean that this program would stop at the first blank line, which actually would probably be okay, but let's do it this way. I need to add a line here after the read line, which says if the length of the score is equal to 0, then break. Alrighty, I'm going to close the file, file.close, and I'm going to print the list. Sorry, I know it's too... far down the bottom. There you go. Hopefully when I run it, it'll give me the chance to enter some data. 100, 200, 300, -1. And well, that didn't work. Oh. If I'm going to append score to a list, what should this line be? Yeah, that needs to be score right there. I'm appending the list to itself. That's pretty unuseful. So I just had to change this line right here. Make sure you get that change in as well. Make that score, not L. I spaced out there.
My answer -1 says we have not converted strings with floats.
All right, let me come look. What I mean by that, we need to decide what our data is going to look like. So I'm going to go back out here, take a look, go and find that scores.txt program file that you made. It'll be in the same directory as your Python script. If you go out and look, you'll see both t.txt and scores.txt. Let's open one up, and there it is. All right, now if this is going to be a really useful program, sounds like Thomas the Tank Engine, who's a really useful train. Sorry, my kid watches too much Thomas. Alrighty, so it might need to look something like this. You might have somebody's name, Joe Bob. Then maybe you'll have a list of scores. Like that. Pardon me? Yeah, what we're going to do is put people's names on one line and then a series of scores on the next line. Why are we not breaking it out like this? Because we could use .strip to turn that one string, that list of numbers like this, into a list. Does that make sense?
No, I was saying, wouldn't you need to make a list every single time after the new name?
That would be cool too, like to do that. Yeah.
But I mean, would all this be one list, or is it gonna be like a new list after every name? Is what I'm
I figured it'd be a new list after every name. So Sue's made straight 100s. Tim's made some 90s and 80s and then 100. So does that make sense, Victoria? How we set it up? Okay. And sometimes you'll see these things set up so that they're even a little bit more structured than that. Like they'll put names inside of things like that, and then they have test scores after them or whatever. But, alright, so that's my scores.txt file. I'm going to do a save as because I don't want that last program to overwrite it. And instead of scores.txt, why don't we call it, I don't know, grades.txt. Just call it grades.txt. Bless you. So the way our program is going to need to work is it's going to go into a loop. It's going to read that line in, that's a name. It's going to read that line in, which is a list of scores. Then it will use .split to turn those scores into numbers, putting them into a list. Then we could average those scores or do whatever we wanted. Then we're going to do the same thing again. Then we're going to do the same thing again. And let's make the program a little bit better behaved. We're going to let's write the version that reads from it first. But maybe let's put that code into a function so that later on we can have a menu that calls the read function. All right, so I'm going to go here and I'm going to make a new file. File, new file. Save it as G file for grade file. This is a Python script, so gfile.py. Name, date, gfile.py, grade file reader. So let's put this in a function. def read grades, and it's going to accept a parameter, which is going to be file name. That way, later on, if we decide to change the file, we'll just pass in a different name to it. Now we're going to open the file for reading. File is equal to open file name, comma, and since we're reading it, we need an R. Let's just print out a message for debug purposes. File opened, comma, file name.
When file equals open, does file name not have to be, quotes?
It would be, but we're passing in it as a parameter. So somewhere down here, we're going to invoke read grades like this, and we are going to pass in. So yes, we will be passing in a file name that has quotes. But you're right, that does look different than how we were doing it. And if you put quotes there, it would try to open a file that actually had that name. But instead, it's a variable. All right, now that the file is open, we're going to use our same syntax, the while true loop. While true, colon. Now our data was structured in this format. The first line is always the name, and then the second line is always a list of scores. So let's just try two reads. Name is equal to file.readline. Scores is equal to file.readline. And we are in trouble if either one of those is equal to 0. So let's do if the length of the name. As a matter of fact, we're in trouble even if well, we're going to go with this, but we may need to make a test. If the length of the name is 0, or the length of the scores is 0, we have a problem and we want to break out of the loop. Now let's just print those guys. Print the name and then the scores. Now that's enough for now. We've written just a little bit. Let's close our file. Say that we're done. So file.close, print, file closed. And let's actually call our read grades program. It's a function. We have to invoke it. Read grades, and then we're going to pass in a file name, grades.txt, because that's the name of the file that we made in Notepad. Looked like it worked. It printed Joe Bob and then a list of scores, and then Sue Thomas and a list of scores, and Tim Jones and a list of scores. I'm kind of confused by these extra spaces. Oh, I know what's going on. We haven't stripped the data. May as well do that. Name is equal to name.strip. I'm adding 2 lines here before we check the length. Scores is equal to scores.strip. There. I just added those 2 lines right there. We're removing the slash ins from the end of the file, the end of the line, the carriage returns, and any extra spaces at the beginning. All right, there we go. From there, it's not a long distance. It's not very far to go to turning this string here, scores, into a list of scores by using split. Then we're going to have to convert them to numbers so that we could use, sum and get the average out of them. Slightly bit more. But that's good enough for now. My guess is that somebody's walked in late and doesn't have this file. You need to open up Notepad, or heck, you could even do this inside idle, but you'll have to be real careful about how you save the file. If you're going to create a text file in idle, the rest of y'all don't need to do this. You do file new, and then you're going to type the scores that I show you, and then you do file, save as. You're going to save it as grades.txt. You're going to put it in the same directory as your Python script. But to make sure it's a text file, you have to do this save as type. And you only need to do this if you walked in after we started the program. Or you could do it in Notepad. You just need to make sure that it goes into the same directory as your Python program. Okay, now unfortunately I can't get this and this in the same place. I think I'm going to shorten that logic. I'm just going to assume that if the name is empty, it's a problem, and that we'll never have a situation where the name was not empty but the scores was. So I made a little change there that y'all don't need to echo, but that way I can get all the code on the screen at the same time while I wander around. So what I would like to do, actually, no, I don't think I'm going to mess with that. Yeah, I am. Let's actually return that data out of here. So return name, comma, scores. Stick that at the bottom of your function. It needs to be tabbed, so it's part of the function. And then down here, we want to get that data back out. Now, we've seen this syntax before. Don't type this, but we've seen this syntax before. I is equal to length, x, or I is equal to, int I. We've seen all that kind of stuff. You can actually have a function return more than one value. So where you do I, comma, j is equal to blah, 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 something like that. And if it passes 2 variables back, then the first one, it gets stored in I, and the second one would get stored in a j. So we're going to do that. Let's get the name and the scores out of the readGrades function, like that. Now this looks weird, or it may look weird, and truth be told, it is weird. I don't know of any other language that allows you to pass back more than one variable with a return statement like that. But since we have that functionality, we're going to take advantage of it. Now let's write a new function called process, which is going to handle that data. Or we could call it print grades. That'd be a fancier name. So again, it's a function. Define print grades, which accepts a student name and the score list. Now it's real easy to convert one variable to a number, right? We've been doing stuff like this. Don't type this. We've been doing this all along. But scores is an entire list. It's not just one number. So converting it to be numbers, we have to process the list. Kind of sounds like a for loop to me. So we need another list that'll hold the converted version of the scores, the numeric version of the scores. And I'm not coming up with a great name for that because this one's already called scores. Pardon me? Yeah, we could use S, we could use capital L. I like S to mean a string, so I'm actually going to go with capital L. We're going to make an empty list, and then we're going to run through the scores list, converting them all to numbers and appending them to our list. We've got two different for loops to choose from. Do you remember what those are? There's the for range loop, and then there's the for value loop. I'd rather use the for value loop because the syntax is easier. Let's see if you remember how to do that. For every value, what comes next? For every value in scores, we're going to take that value and convert it to a float. And we're going to append it to our list. All right, now I'm going to fly off the handle and make too many changes.
Shouldn't it be L.append value?
Yeah, I'm making the same mistake as I did last time. Thank you for catching it. L.append value. And then lastly, we're going to just return the list right here. Okay, now what I'm thinking is that this function is so useful in and of itself, the ability to turn a list of scores that's stored as strings into numbers, that I want to make the function just handle that. So I'm going to call it convert list. Convert. I'm going to take off that name comma. So I made a lot of changes to the DEF line, so I'm going to flag that with, like 5 hashtags. Change this. So our program's actually going to wind up with, more than 2 functions because the next thing we're going to do is do scores is equal to convert scores. It's too bad the float function doesn't take an entire list and return a list. We could just call this function float, but we really should not be defining things with the names. Let's see if that works. I'm just going to print out the name. No. I've made several mistakes here, and I'm so sorry. Read grades is handling an entire list of data, not just one person. So we're going to have to make a small change. We don't need that name comma scores here. Matter of fact, just delete the 3 bottom lines. We have some hacking and slashing to do. Delete those 3 lines and then move this convert function. It'll probably be okay where it is. But I'd rather move it above this read grades because it's going to be called inside of read grades actually. So what I did is I cut the entire convert function and I'm pasting it above read grades. And I'm going to add some comments because this program is getting weird enough that we need to actually describe what the function does. Convert function takes a list of strings and returns a list of scores. So where is an appropriate place in our read grades function to convert the scores? I'm thinking it'd be a good idea. We haven't split the scores yet. So we're going to need to split that string here. What does split mean? It means convert a string into a list, breaking at the spaces or the commas or whatever. So scores is equal to scores.split based on spaces. If we had the scores separated by commas, we would do that. Bless you. Now here's where I'm going to convert the scores to their list for further processing. Well, let's wait on that. Yeah, maybe here after we've checked to see if we need to break out. Do scores is equal to convert scores. And hopefully now it'll be a list. Let me run it, make sure it works, and then I'll come around and help y'all, because we made some radical changes. Now I made a dumb mistake. I told you to delete everything. You have to go back and add the original call to read grades at the bottom. So scroll back down to the bottom and do read grades with whatever your file name was. Daniel, yours was different. A lot of other people use the name grades.txt. So add that back to the bottom. Okay. The difference, I mean, that looked like a lot of changes to add, but really all we wanted to do was to convert that string. That was one string from beginning to end with quotes around it or whatever. We changed it into a series of scores. Alright guys, for those of y'all who have it working, add the code here that will calculate the sum of scores and the average of scores and print those out. I'm going to have to scroll up though to show the other function. Apologize for making it harder to read by deleting all the blank lines. Anyways, I'm now going to delete these 3 comments so that I can scroll up further. But after the print name, comma, scores, do the sum and average right there after the print, if you can.
So as part of the read grades?
Right, right. Is that the best place to put it? Not really. But to do anything else, we're going to have to create lists of lists, and I don't really want to do that. Okay, so we have, at this point, scores is a list of numbers. And I really would like for y'all to have this memorized. How do you get an average? You just do this. Total, whoopsie. So underneath that print names, comma, scores function, right here, above the file closed, but it needs to be tabbed, total is equal to what? I know some of y'all did it. Sum of scores, and then the average is equal to what? Yeah. Or total divided by the length of the scores. kind of wishing that this average line of data was going to be on the same line of data as the print here, which we could do if we moved that print down here or we move these two up here. So guys, I'm going to make a little bit of a change. You see that print statement, print name, comma, scores? I'm deleting that. So I'm just going to comment it out. And I'm going to put all of that in here. The one underneath the AVG, print the name, print the scores, and then the word average equals, and then the average. Now it looks like I'm leaving out the total entirely, but I think that's okay. Look at that. What'd I do wrong there? I made it,
Use the wrong variable. For
yeah, I used the wrong variable name.
Just gotta change.
I should have either called this average or made this AVG. Alright, this file closed is kind of superfluous now, and this file opened is kind of extra. Wouldn't be a bad idea to comment out those print statements. They're good for debugging purposes, though. Alright. I said way at the beginning of this that Sue had perfect grades, and it looks like her average is equal to 100, so that actually worked. Alright, we are good to go. We have this program working. What we're going to do now is flowchart it. Why don't we take a small break. These are the lines we just added. Well, we commented that one out. So for those of y'all who don't have it working, double check what you see up here. Alright, let's come back at about 1:35, y'all.
Are we going to have a review for Wednesday? Or did we already have one?
Little bit of review. It's going to be very similar to our last exam, actually, but we're going to have, you know, we've covered lists and string functions, and now we've covered files. I better not put too much about files since we've only done it one day, and it's not fair to turn around and put that on the exam afterwards. Well, I wish I'd turned the recorder off during the break. All right, what we're going to do next is we're going to flowchart this. The one that I want to flowchart is this big nasty function. Not that it's nasty. Hopefully it's comprehensible. But then I wanted y'all to do some flowcharting on your own in it. Howsoever, that's pretty short and paltry compared to this. Maybe I'll just do part of this, leave some of it to you, and then have y'all come and do the other one. So what we're going to do is flowchart this. I'll help you with parts of it. I want you to work on some of it on your own, and then we'll do a review for the exam. The exam's going to be very similar to what the last one was, but we have covered some extra stuff like list functions, you know, lists, and string functions like isDigit and isAlnum. And now we've done files, but I'm not going to throw a lot in about files because we've only done it for one day. So let us pop open, go back into Lucidchart. So if we look at our code G file, we're making a plan of attack. Every DEF goes in its own column, its own flowchart. Then the unindented code, which is just one line of code, is not real sophisticated, also goes in its own column. So for the unindented one, we're going to need a start and a stop. So I'll do that one and y'all do all the rest. Nobody, okay. Maybe not. But that's the easy one. Let's just knock that one out of the way, or we can leave it for last. If we leave it for last, we'll forget it. So I need a start. I need a function call to a predefined function. Do you remember which symbol we used for that? Rectangle with bars. Predefined process. Why? Because it's a function we wrote. What did we call it? We called it read grades, and we passed in a file name. So read grades, parentheses, quote, grades.txt. And I put a space after the parentheses just to make sure it tabbed it nicely. And then I put a stop. Put a stop to it. Here we go. I am sorry, I did not hear you.
We made a flowchart. We're done.
Yeah, we're done. Alrighty, class over. Now let's do a little more. That is the simplest flowchart we've done. Alright, next column over. Do we want to do the convert one, or do we want to since convert is listed first in a file, why don't we at least drop the start box for convert? But then we're going to skip it and go on to the next one. So, since it's its own function, we start it with an oval, terminator, define, convert, and it took a list of scores. I'm going to leave that as is. And I'm going to go over to the next one. But we have to leave enough room for a loop and stuff. You know, there's going to be some kind of loop involved here, blah, 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 and there's going to be some statement over to the right. Don't add these. I'm just kind of spacing it out. I know that I'm going to need that much room, so now I'm scrolling over that far, maybe even farther, to put my next one. There we go. Heck, we have a lot of room. Okay. So this one was called read grades, DEF read grades, and it took a parameter to accept an argument, which was file name. Alright, I can't do the rest from memory, so let's get the code back. Alright, first line of read grades is a file equals open. Really? Okay, so in my opinion, everything that involves hitting the disk, any read lines, any dot writes, should go in a tilted box. Now, honestly, I hadn't thought about it, whether an open or a close also go in tilted boxes. I'm going to say that they do because they're also input-output. They're also data commands of a sort. I may change my mind on that for next semester, but for now, file is equal to open file name is going to be in a block. Now I could make the syntax exactly what we see here, or I could go that pseudocode route and just kind of, fluff it a little bit. But since I have the source code in front of me, I'm just going to follow the same syntax. Or I could delete that and just say open file, That's pretty clear what it's doing. I'm going to skip that print statement. I'd mentioned that I didn't think those prints were necessary anymore. So this is kind of like interpretive dance. We're making it up as we go along. Now we have a while true. And I'm not sure we've ever flowcharted something with a break statement. Maybe we have. While true, the rest of our code is going to be within the while. No, that's not true. We had a file.close at the bottom. We also had a print statement and a return statement. The return statement we could have removed. We changed our tactic on it. And we're not going to need that print statement. So I think the last one, other than the return at the bottom, is just going to be file.close. I think I'll make those changes to the code right now. Go to the bottom of read grades. And if you want to, get rid of file closed and the return statement. Also, I said let's get rid of that print statement. Okay. Up at the top, file opened, print file opened. I should run it, make sure I haven't broken the code with those modest changes. Yeah, that looks okay. Alright, so while true. What's the first line of code inside the while loop? First line indented over.
Name.
Yeah, name is equal to read line, or file.readline. Again, we could, loosey-goosey it and just make it say read name, and then read scores, or we could use the exact syntax. Read name, or read line name, or name equals read line. I'm kind of fond of that. Let's do that. Heck, let's just put the whole thing. Name is equal to file.readline. The point I'm trying to make when I'm wavering on these boxes is that you don't have to copy line by line or word for word what your code is. That's not going to be that useful for somebody who goes and implements this in a different language. It may make it clearer. If it does, go ahead and do that. But this is like pseudocode. It doesn't have to be a programming language. A flowchart really isn't a programming language. Okay, after that there was a scores equals read line. I'm just going to copy that block. I select it and Control C, paste as a Control V, as in, I don't know what V stands for. Verbatim. Okay. And now scores is equal to file.readline. Then we stripped it. The word strip may not make a lot of sense to a programmer in another language, so that is not reading from the keyboard or from a disk though, so I'm not going to put it in a tilted block. I use the tilted blocks only for reading to a file, writing from a file, opening or closing a file, or reading from the keyboard or a print statement. Pretty much everything else that's not a decision, a diamond, goes in a rectangle. So I could write an English description. I could type in strip scores of, whatever. But I'm not going to think that hard. So name is equal to name.strip. And the Java and the C++ programmers would be so thankful that we're using a syntax that they're not used to seeing. And then scores is equal to scores.strip. Now, according to my way of thinking, if you're doing two things in a row that are the exact same stuff, you could put those in the same box, but that's the only time. But I would not have minded putting name is equal to name.strip and scores equals scores.strip in the same line. Also wouldn't have minded just leaving it off entirely and leaving that as an option. So scores is equal to scores.strip for the person implementing it, because they may not need to do this. As you learn other programming languages, you learn more about what, kind of what is that class? Comparative anatomy or something like that. Because you can pretty much do anything in any language. You can implement the loops and the file I/O and stuff like that, but the way they are done is quite often significantly different, syntax-wise. Alrighty, after we stripped it, we had an if statement. If length of name is equal to 0, break.
Would that be the no on the
I am so sorry, pardon me?
while? Would that be the no on the while? Or would it be something else?
No. We're going to draw a no, and it's going to go all the way off to the bottom and hit file close. It's going to look kind of weird, yeah. Kind of bear with me. In fact, let me do this. I could go back and open that flowcharting cookbook file. It won't take very long to draw it. Okay, so you have something, you have some kind of loop. It's a while loop, while blah blah blah. You come over here and you do something, read some data, something, I don't care. And then you have an if. Whatever condition causes you to break. Like that. If. And then that's going to be a line jutting off here. I'm going to change that word yes to break to indicate what it's doing there. And then the no line is just going to be whatever was next. Process data. And this is going to loop back up to the while loop. So that's like that. And then this while loop is not going to have a no. Why? Because it's an infinite loop. While true. It does have a way to escape the infinite loop, which is that break statement. So that break statement is going to come and run underneath the while loop. Something like that, And then it's going to go to the end. Do one more thing, and then end. I'll zoom out in just a second so all that makes sense. That's the way the break's going to look. If you have a while true, that's the one time that you don't have both a yes and a no leaving a while block, a decision block. That's because the exiting the loop happens somewhere else inside the loop. While true with break. Alright, I'm going to go back and actually code that. I just wanted y'all to see where this was going. Does that make sense? Okay. Hope that was a yes.
Yeah, that was it.
Okay, so going back to this one. We're going to need our if statement that causes the break. And honestly, if we go back and take a peek at this one, no, I don't want to make the break jut off that way because it would cross lines. But conceivably, I could have made it go like that if you didn't mind crossing lines. I don't know. Up to you as long as you don't have a no coming out of the while. But that's only for while trues. So we have an if statement. If the length of the name is 0, that means there's no more data left. If the length of name is equal to 0, or we could word it more generally, if no data. Or if valid data, you know. If that's true, we're going to break. So I'm going to change that yes word to the word break. And I'm not going to draw anything else because that line is going to eventually, you know, veer back underneath the while. But if that's not true, we're going to do some data handling. So here we are. Scores is equal to convert scores.
Wouldn't that would be in a predefined?
It would be. I put it in the wrong block. Thank you very much. Since this is a function call, it needs to be in a box with bars. So I right-clicked on it, do change shape, and choose the box with bars. Looks like military stripes or something. Alright, then I'm going to calculate the total and the average and do the print. And you know what? I never even use the total. I may not do that line. I'm just going to do the average. So that's math. Average is equal to the sum of the scores divided by the length of the scores. And then we print that stuff out. So here's my flowchart as it is. I'm going to zoom back in so you can see all the writing. I have all of this in a big while loop. I need to tack on the print statement. I've got everything but the print statement, and then it's going to loop back up to while. So print the name followed by the scores, followed by the average. If I put spaces after the commas, it'll make it look nicer when it pads it out. Give it some line breaks. Alright, that's the end of the loop. Anytime I hit the end of an the end of a loop, I need a line going back up to the decision block. So I'm going to zoom way out so I can see that. Draw a line from here to here. And then I had a file closed. And then the return. So, if I was going to do what I had done previously, I would draw a line all the way from here, all the way from here, all the way from here, and then put it there. I really wish I'd made the decision just to make the break line cross the other line. I might do that. So I'm going back and I'm deleting that line that says break. And it's going to jut off back to be under the original while loop. And then I'm going to do a file close. File.close and a return. So since that's a file operation, it's data. file.close, or close file if I wanted to write it in English, and then a return. Even if you don't have a return in your code, you have to put a return here. I guarantee that people are going to write a flowchart on the exam and leave off the final return if it's not in the function. I'm going to change that word no to a break to make it very obvious how it's working. I did that last time, but then I forgot. And I certainly don't want it at the intersection of those two things, so I'm going to drag it back. If you had wanted to, you could have left that line going off to the right and just done a close file and a return off the right. I try to make it so that the things line up in columns. Sometimes that's really annoying to try to accomplish. But everything that's at one tab level, I try to put in one column. Like that. You don't have to do that. Like I've said before, these are just maps. You know, spaces, you know, alignment is really immaterial as to where they go. Okay, there's a lot of writing here. And if you didn't type in all of this stuff, it's impossible for you to read now, probably. Let me know if there's a part of it I need to zoom in on. I can print it out if you need. What I would like for y'all to do, those who have drawn the flowchart to this point, is go ahead and do the convert scores function. It's just a couple lines of code, so it won't take you very long to draw that. Anybody need a printout of this? Okay. Two requests. Anybody else? Three. Hassan, you need one? Okay. Oh. As I wrestle with the position of this line looping back, I felt like perhaps it'd look better if it was a curved line. If you ever want to draw a curved line rather than a straight line, you can go up to that thing that right next to where it says 1px or 2px or whatever, and there's this angle looking thing, and you could do that if you thought it looked better. I don't know that I do really. I wanted to demonstrate that for y'all. So all homework needs to be turned in by the end of next Monday. So the last homework assignment for the semester is going to be to turn this other program we did into a flowchart. Do you have to have that done before the exam? No. Might it help? Yeah, it'd prepare you for the next for the flowcharting portion of the exam, which is a significant number of points. So if you've got the convert function done, and you don't want to stay and work on that flowchart right dang now, class is officially over. Wait, we said we were going to do a review, so skip that. Class is not over. Still, I'm going to make the Dropbox for it. So there's the Dropbox, Dropbox R, gfile.py, July 24py, and the PDF.
But they won't have any more homework.
One more homework assignment after this, which is to turn that July 24.py, which I will include in the homework assignment. You know, I'll copy and paste it into the Word doc. In class, we're going to do a summary. So I'll come help you. When you're doing the convert function, there's going to be some code, blah, 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 I don't know what's there. Then you're going to have a for loop. And then off the for loop, there's going to be some other code, blah, blah, blah. Maybe a couple of lines. And then it's going to loop back to the for. The only time you don't draw a no line coming out of a while or a for is if it's a while true. Otherwise, everything's always going to loop back to the for. And honestly, if you can't figure out the break statement, it's better to, go ahead and have the no coming from the while loop. But I'd like for y'all to get it right. And then there's going to be a no, and it's just going to go down. I don't remember if there was anything after that line. Let's go look. See, the last thing in convert is just a return statement. So you just put a, return or return L or whatever. Obviously, that's not what it is, but that's going to be very similar. Everything has to end in a stop or a return. If you leave that off, that's going to ding you a few points. It's not meant to be comprehensive, but you know the way programming languages are. You learn a part of it and then you keep using that. So it actually is kind of comprehensive. So effectively, everything that you learned up to the first exam, you still need to know. But I'm not going to review that. And then we did list stuff. How do you make an empty list?
Yeah. Right.
Like that. How do you make a list that has like 2 or 3 items in it, like 3 colors? L is equal to, let's use some brackets. What do I do next? I want to put red, green, and blue in it.
Strings and quotation marks.
Yep, red, green, blue. Say I wanted to add, in other words, append, the color yellow to that list. So my list is still C. Don't be confused by the fact that I guess I should just make the same letter all the way across. But anyways, since these are colors, I'm going to call it C. I want to add, in other words, append. How do I do that? We just did it. What word did we use to add to our list in our convert function? Dot append. Add yellow to it. Alright guys, and I've decided I'm not going to upload the review, so take notes or watch the last 10 minutes of the video and take the notes. Alright, then we can sort the list. Do you remember how to sort? C.sort. If you want to insert an item at the beginning of the list, we don't use append, that would go to the end. What do we do to insert an item at the beginning of the list? I think it's just insert. C.insert. Well, I'm failing my own exam. We have to specify 0, and then we specify the value that we're adding to it. What's another color besides yellow? How about orange? Cyan? What did you say?
Pink.
Pink, yeah, okay, here we go. Since I don't remember if the 0 falls first or second, I'm not going to count you off if you don't get it right. I know that we did this in a homework assignment.
So how is it when you use the actual, like, you know how it's in a list, like the first value in the list? How I don't know what you did, you either replaced it or you put it, you made.
Yeah, if you want to replace an item, you have to do it by its index number. So how do we print the... Let's add some comments here. Add to end of list. Sort the list. That's so obvious, I'm not going to do it. And then insert at beginning of list. Those are the things we just did. If I was typing this into idle, it would color code some of it. I'm going to go ahead and cut and paste into idle. There. That's prettier. Okay, so print the first item of the list. The first item in a list is at what position, what index number? You'd think it would be 1, it's not. So print C subscript 0. That's the first item. How do we print the last item? There's 2 ways. Let's just go for the shorter one. C, and then what are we going to put as our index number? -1. All right, and if we wanted to do the longer way, just because we're all tough and we can hack it, C at the position of the length of C -1. That's kind of annoying. I'd rather do it the short way. Not every language supports that -1 indexing. And although we did it a couple of times today, if you want to get the sum and the average of the list, I think you probably know how to do it. If you have a couple of numbers, 1, 2, and 3, and you want to get the average, the total is equal to the sum of those numbers. And the average, or AVG, whatever, is equal to the sum of those numbers divided by the length of the list. Which brings up the good question, how do you get the length of the list? We've already used this word twice here. LEN. L or N or whatever our list is. Okay. Now let's use a for loop to print the list out. We could either use the for range or the for value. Let's do for range first because we did that in our code. No, we didn't. We did for value. So what would the syntax of that be? For, what did we do in our convert function? For value in the list, and then let's just print the list out. Excuse me, print the value out. You could do something with it, convert it to an int or whatever, that's enough. So 2 ways of printing lists, for value and for range. That's one way. Oh, Veronica, I'm not sure I ever answered your question about changing a value. If you want to change the first value, you use that index number. What I did, guys, is I scrolled up to above the print statement, and it's going to be C subscript 0 is equal to something else. We inserted pink in there. You're probably upset that we're deleting pink, so we're at least changing it to purple. There we go. And by the way, all of this stuff is in our notes. It's just you'd have to remember what day the notes were. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to open those notes up and eyeball them, maybe even make a little list on your notebook of which topics are covered in which day's notes. How do we remove an item from our list? I'm hoping you'll tell me because I'm not quite remembering. Was it remove? Nobody's remembering. Fine, make me look it up. Remove an item from list in Python. Okay. To remove an item from the list, if I use the word delete, they're the same thing. It's L.remove, and I'm tired of green. If I want to remove the first item from the list, I can do it like this. I have to specify the position. The syntax is a little bit nastier, and I don't recall if I made y'all do this. I'm probably not going to ask it. Like that. That would remove the first item from the list no matter what its value was. This would remove whichever item was green. That is almost enough about lists. How do you convert a string to a list? We did that today. You have a string that's got a whole bunch of numbers separated by spaces. How do you convert that to a list? Somebody go take a peek at our convert program. How'd we do that?
Convert, he converts each value into a new list, and then that you replace the list.
Right, and there was one function that chopped that string up and put it into the list before we started processing it. Split, right. So it's L is equal to string dot split, like that. And inside here you can put the quotes if it's, the space if it's separated by spaces. You can put commas if it's separated by commas or whatever. Okay, that's enough about lists. Now string stuff. This one kind of crosses the bridge, from list to strings. I'm going to make a list of functions, and I want you to tell me what the function names are. Check to see if a string is a number or letter, a space. I'm not sure what else we used. Oh, all uppercase and all lowercase. How do you check to see if a string is a number or a letter is a number? Is digit, right. So string dot is digit. How do you check to see if it's a number? Wait, we just did that. A number or a letter. Wait, let's just do is letter. How do you check to see if something is a letter? S dot is what? Alpha. How about letter or number? Is what? Alnum. Alphanumeric. All right, space is really easy. Is space, yep. String dot is space. If it's all uppercase, S. Yep. I'm so sorry, pardon? Yeah, good. And then if it's all lowercase, you can probably guess it is lower. Converting a string to all uppercase versus to all lowercase. I don't recall how many times we did that. Yeah, it's just upper. S dot upper makes a string all upper. It's not is upper. If you're converting it, you leave the word is off. You're not asking a question. And then if you want to make it lowercase, it's S dot lower. Remove spaces from end of list as opposed to remove spaces from start of list as to remove spaces from both sides of list. We certainly used at least one of these, if not two of them, in our code today. How to remove spaces from the end of the list. Yeah, we use strip, and the end of the list is the right side. That's why I'm waving my arms around like I'm crazy. Okay, so string dot strip, rstrip, excuse me, removes the spaces from the end. Guess what the beginning would be? It's the left side. And then, yep, just string dot strip with no left or right. All right, here's a vague question. What else have we done with strings? Yeah. Convert a string to numbers. You have two choices. Float that string or int that string. I think that's probably about enough about strings. Oh, and the length of the string is the same as getting the length of a list. Okay, now we need to talk about slicing. Slicing, we mentioned it up here when we were printing out the first item and the last item. Slicing is using the square brackets. If you have it, it works on both strings and lists. Print out the first letter of a string. Print S sub 0. Print the first two letters. We're going to use a slice with a colon between the numbers. Print S0 colon. What are we going up to? The easy way to think of it is that you give it a starting position and then however many letters you just add that on. Like that. If you did :1, it'd only get one character. Print the third and fourth letters. Print string. Now the third position is actually what index number? Yeah, it's 2. And how long is this list going to be? Third and fourth, so 2 plus 2 is 4. So this is all slicing. And all of these things work with both strings and lists. Print the third and fourth items in the list, same kind of thing. So store the first two values of the list in a new list. Named. F2 for first two. F2 is equal to, now we're going to get a slice. What goes in here to get the first two values of that list? Same syntax as the string. 0, 2. If you want, you can leave the 0 off. You can also leave the number off at the end if it's going all the way to the end, like starting at position 3 and going to the end. Okay, we've done the loops. You know how to write the 2 for loops. I don't think I ever did the range-based loop. All right, let's do a range-based loop right now. Range loop as opposed to a value loop. For x in range 0, 5, that would count the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, switching gears to files. What was the function we used to open our file? File.open. File, or no, just file is equal to open. File name, comma, read if you're reading it. Or file is equal to open, file name, comma, write if you're writing to it. What was a command that we used to read a line of data from it? We did that in two different places today. We did something like scores equals. Scores is equal to, now we have that file, so file dot, what goes here? We want to read a line? Read line. Now, we want to write to that thing? File dot write new data. Something like that. And then file dot close. True, false. You should close a file as soon as you are done reading or writing it. Is that true or false? It's true. Alrighty, by and large, I think that's the new material we've covered. We've used loops a lot, but just asking the syntax of it, you know, what's the last version? The word we haven't used yet is while loops. You could either do while true with a break, or you can do while condition, you know, while x is less than 10 or whatever. So that's a while loop versus a while condition loop. So, as a recap, two for loops, what were they? For, value, enlist, and what was the other kind? For I in range or X in range or whatever. Then two while loops. While true with break, or while condition. Example condition would be x, you know, while x is less than 10. That kind of thing. I think that's about it. We didn't get out early after all. That's okay. You got your money's worth today. Alright, so come in at the regular time on Wednesday. We'll do the exam. If you flat out can't be here on Wednesday, let me know, because we could do it Monday of next week. But wouldn't it be cool to get it out of the way early?
Yeah, I'm totally cool with
Pardon me? Whichever day, please just let me know. I'll show up on Monday. I have to be here. So. And I guess if I grade all the exams and I don't see your submission, I'll know you were coming in Monday.
So we have the option of coming in Monday?
If you want. Yeah. Yeah, if you want to come in Monday instead of Wednesday, that's fine.
Wednesday's the last day of class.
I'm so sorry, I didn't hear.
Wednesday's the last day of class.
Wednesday's the last day of class. Monday is the last day for homework. Remember that the last homework assignment, which is due next Monday, along with anything else you do, is drawing a flow chart from the other program we did today, which I'll paste into the Word doc. All right, any other questions? Fascinates me that people leave early, especially on review for test day. Now, I did say that they could watch the video, but How many people are going to go and watch the video? I don't know.
I watch it all the time. I'm surprised they have such little views.
That's awesome. I'm so glad you do.
You know what would be nice? If you could, because I'm so lazy, if you could separate the 1113 classes from the 1173. Like maybe create a playlist or something, just automatically.
Oh, make a playlist. Yeah, yeah, that'd be a really good idea. I need to do that and update the playlist, after each class. Next semester I'll do that. You're going, why don't you do it this semester?